We're bringing you boots on the ground insight from the ranchers, conservationists, and partners who are helping to preserve the best of the Golden State for generations to come. Join the California Rangeland Trust for inspiring stories of resilience, innovation, and hope as we get tuned into the land.
Welcome to another episode of Tune Into the Land. I am your host, Michael Delbar, CEO of the California Rangeland Trust. Happy National Agriculture Day, a day where we recognize and celebrate the many contributions of agriculture in our everyday lives. Ranching families, through their stewardship of the land and production of food and fiber, play a crucial role in maintaining the health of our environment. Through managed grazing in particular, ranchers provide myriad benefits to the plants and wildlife that rely on the land for sustenance. Yet, a common misconception persists that grazing harms the environment. That's why in recent years, a collaborative effort involving researchers, scientists, ranchers, and organizations like ours has been diligently working to dispel this narrative by demonstrating that responsible grazing practices coupled with proper land stewardship benefits the land and its inhabitants. Another organization that is helping to showcase to consumers the benefits of responsible grazing on and for wildlife habitat is the Audubon Society. They do this through their conservation ranching program. This program recognizes and certifies ranchers who effectively manage their land, prioritizing both livestock health and the welfare of the diverse bird populations found on grasslands and rangelands. Today, we're excited to have Matt Allhouse, Senior Manager for Conservation Ranching at California's Audubon Society, joining us to offer a bird's-eye perspective on the program's objectives and its positive impacts on the health of the land, wildlife habitat, and greater ranching communities. Matt hails from Wyoming and has been the Conservation Ranching Program Manager for the state since September 2019. As a rangeland ecologist, he has 15 years of experience associated with land policy, management, and science. Without further ado, let's welcome Matt to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So Matt, tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got connected to the Audubon.
Well, you summed it up pretty good there in the beginning. I grew up in the least populous place in the country, and I took a lot of things for granted growing up out there. And we had an appreciation for the land and for big, wide open spaces. Moving to California, I've realized I went from the least populous to the most populous place, but there are still wild places out here. And that's something that I hold dear. And I know a lot of private lands are providing habitat here in California and in Wyoming and across the West. And so I pursued a vocation in rangeland ecology, studied environment and natural resource, so problems and policy. And that got me into soil science and restoration reclamation ecology, which sort of dove down the wildlife path. So got into wildlife quite a bit. And after 8 years of working for a private consulting firm in the oil and gas industry, I decided I wanted to do conservation work. And so I moved to Central America and started working with the Peregrine Fund, doing research on an endangered falcon species. And that's what really got me into the bird scene.
Oh, cool.
So, it's been a journey.
What part of Wyoming did you hail from?
I was in southeastern Wyoming, north of Laramie. That was the family ranch. Beautiful
area. A little different than Northern California?
A little bit. Not too much different than Modoc, though.
So what is your role with Audubon? Explain to us what the Conservation Ranching Program Manager is.
Well, originally I thought I would be more involved in science and getting things done on the ground, and the manager position has led me down all sorts of paths. And I think the biggest one for me has been building relationships. And so as we expand our program here in the state, building relationships with ranchers has been one of the most important things for us and for my position. Our program is a market-based conservation program, which is kind of interesting to try to wrap your head around, market-based conservation. And so a lot of my role has been connecting ranchers with new places to graze, offering technical service or technical advice on grazing practices, and then trying to help folks get the funding for the conservation work on the ground that actually has to happen. So infrastructure projects, fencing, water development, those types of things.
So you are now living in Winters on the Bobcat Ranch, which is owned by Audubon. Tell us a little bit more about the Bobcat. What is that like? What's the ranch do? What's its purpose?
Bobcat Ranch is a special and magical place. It's one of my favorite places in the world. It's just west of Winters, California, and kind of extends from Highway 128 and Lake Berryessa several miles to the north. And it is sort of the end of this contiguous wilderness that runs all the way from Snow Mountain and Clear Lake almost down to the bay. And so Bobcat Ranch was acquired by Audubon in 2007 to be a demonstration site for ways that grazing can coexist with having a bird sanctuary. So really focused in on preserving grasslands and their focal species, but also blue oak woodlands.
And the Bobcat's had its share of challenges in the last number of years with several fires that have come through there.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it has one of the highest return fire frequencies in the state. So it's burned 7 of the past 12 years. It's been challenging, but it gives us an opportunity to make critical partnerships with CAL FIRE, the Poudre Creek Council, and some other folks in the area to monitor change over time that's associated with these fire regimes, look at flux and soil carbon, and how these different plant species assemblages come back and return and recover after fire.
It's a great laboratory out there. Tell us, let's back up just a sec. Tell us about Audubon Society itself and what is the Audubon Society's mission?
Well, it's named after some guy. And this guy used to paint birds and was a naturalist, but we don't need to worry about him. The real Audubon Society and the mission of Audubon started around the turn of the last century when a group of women that liked to wear big feathered hats realized that bird populations were declining. In particular, these birds with big feathers, the gray egret. And so they started a market-based approach and a campaign to ban feathers in hats. And single-handedly, they saved the bird from extinction. And so now it's kind of interesting. You fast forward 120 years, and we're now just revisiting this market-based conservation approach with Audubon's conservation ranching program. So the mission of Audubon is to stabilize and reverse declining bird populations. Birds have been in precipitous decline for the past 50 years across the continent. And so our mission is to reverse those population declines, but also create places for communities and the welfare of people and birds at the same time.
So what do you see out on the ground, both on the Bobcat and other places you've been, how the role of cattle, livestock, grazing, how does that interact with bird habitat?
Well, they both live in the same place. And I've said it before, but birds can fly. And so if they don't like a particular habitat, they're going to move and they're going to utilize a different place. And so we use birds as an indicator of ecosystem health. So on all of our ranches that participate in our program, we go out and conduct bird surveys where we can then take a look at their abundance and diversity that tells us things about the land, like, well, what type of ground cover there is, what type of plant species there are on the ground. And those habitat indicators are great also for determining forage capacity and figuring out where animals are when and how that's affecting habitat for birds as well as other wildlife.
I know when I'm out on the range and out in the mountains, it's really cool to see the variety of bird species that are out there. And I see, particularly in regard to some of the hawks and the eagles and such, that are really thriving in areas where they can find their prey. And so is there a nexus between good grazing management and habitat for not only the birds themselves, but for the ease of bird hunting not hunting the birds, but bird foraging, I guess is another way of saying that.
Bird hunters are some of Audubon's biggest advocates.
Yep.
And so I'll give a shout out to some of the upland bird hunters. But no, definitely. And when we develop a habitat management plan for a property, we take a look at focal bird species. And a focal bird is something that would be an indicator of ecosystem health. And so if you take a look at raptors, they are an iconic species that need open areas to hunt based on which raptor you're looking at. And so the tough part about this program in California is that not all rangelands are grasslands. And so people are grazing in a variety of different habitats. And that's why we need to look at species that aren't just grassland birds. Open areas do provide good habitat for prey species, for raptors, in particular in areas that raptors migrate. So we work with folks on the North Coast and the Central Coast that are critical migration corridors for raptors coming through and for their prey during those long, hard journeys.
You said that much more eloquently than I did, by the way. Some of our landowner partners, such as the Orvis Ranch in Calaveras and Stanislaus counties and the Avanalis Ranch in San Luis Obispo County, are part of the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program. Can you tell us more about the program and what it does for ranchers like those?
Certainly. And so, we meet these folks, and we've had folks reaching out to us to participate in the program. The Orvis Ranch and Avanalis Ranch are perfect examples. Susan and Nora Harper reached out to us because they were interested in birds. They were interested in how their grazing was affecting bird habitat. And so the program goes through a process where we meet someone, we collect as much information as we can about their property, and then we co-develop this habitat management plan. And that's something that I try to reiterate, is that it's their plan. We co-develop the plan for their grazing operation, where we point out and bring out all of these ideas for how to improve habitat and what critical types of habitat they have on their place. Once the plan is developed, we submit their plan and an application to our third-party auditor, who is the Food Alliance. And then the Food Alliance comes in and ensures that protocols are being met on a property. Then they get certified. They're raised on Audubon bird-friendly land certification. And that's where the real partnership begins, is because then we can use their property to not just promote their product and their beef, but be able to connect them with our volunteer chapter base. And so there's 49 different Audubon chapters here in California. So we can locally connect our ranchers with people that want to source their meat. Also, these places provide new opportunities for chapter members to go out and bird. And so they can go see a new place, get new birds on their list, and eat beef from the ranches who are sourcing them. In addition to that, Michael, the Orvis Ranch has been doing great things. They're rotating animals across their property. They have critical riparian habitat and some of the best grassland bird habitat I've seen in the entire Central Valley. And I like to point it out because a few years ago, we were in one of California's biggest droughts ever. You would drive out to the Orvis Ranch just east of Farmington, and there was bare ground on both sides of the road. The only place you saw western meadowlarks was in the Barrow Ditch, where there was still grass growing. And then you would pull up and start driving, and there was grass on the side of the road. Meadowlarks were everywhere, and that was the Orvis Ranch. And they had just as high of a stocking density as all their neighbors did. But they had a ton of grass, forbs, and were providing habitat, doing good things for soil health and soil carbon, and they were doing it with just as many animals as their neighbors. And so it's kind of cool to see how that can actually happen on the ground, and especially in times of uncertainty and times of drought. So it's a cool example, and I could talk about the Avanalis Ranch too. It's a pretty cool spot.
You mentioned management plans, and management plans can invoke one of a couple different responses from a landowner. Sometimes management plans can be very onerous, and it's viewed as someone coming in and telling that landowner how to run their property, how to run their ranch. So as you can imagine, that's not always well received. But you're describing a management plan that's done differently. Tell us a little bit more about how that document is collaboratively designed with the landowner.
It's a really good question, and it can be contentious. The word plan and the word auditor scare a lot of folks. And so when we go in to co-develop this plan with folks, we learn from them. We don't want to tell people how to manage their land. We want to hear how they're doing it. And we basically incorporate how they're doing it into their plan. I think another major component of this plan is they're evergreen, meaning plans always change. And so having this document that's evergreen that folks at Audubon and a rancher can update whenever they want, update their goals and objectives based on extenuating circumstances or drought or floods. But then thinking about what their wish list is. And every rancher I know loves wildlife and wants to have habitat on their property. So we kind of make it this wish list. Okay, in a perfect scenario, in a perfect world, how many animals would you have? And what would you want to see on the ground as far as habitat goes? And then we work from there.
Recently, Audubon produced a short film called Who's on the Ground, Wings in the Sky. And your past director of Land and Water Conservation, who's now, coincidentally, the Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat for the California Resources Agency, Megan Hurdle, said that if you would have told me 7 years ago that Audubon would have their logo on a package of beef, I would not have believed you. Why do you think she said that?
Another contentious question, Michael. No, Megan's great. I'm glad that she put that in the film. It was because at that point, a lot of the environmental community viewed grazing or all grazing as a bad thing. Now, we know these landscapes across the American West co-evolved with large ungulates and grazers. And in that process, the plants evolved to be grazed. The wildlife evolved in areas that had a mosaic on the landscape because of grazing. That's a big point that we've been trying to get across in our program, is that grazing isn't bad for the land, only bad grazing is. And so when Megan said that, I think she thought the environmental community wasn't ready for Audubon seal to be on beef in the market. But we know that Audubon and Audubon followers and chapter members love birds, and they want to do good things for birds. And this is one way they can do it with their purchasing power. So putting our seal on beef can mean a lot of things. But it's the only way that we think we can actually make a difference to stabilize grassland bird declines, is having a national program across 15 states and incentivizing folks to do it with our seal.
Are you seeing a change in philosophy or attitude amongst your members?
Audubon's chapters are these amazing grassroots 501(c)(3)s. Most of them are volunteers, and we have chapters across the state. And so that has been initially our main audience for folks to reach out to, because they can share the word. They can share the story of their ranchers and the story of why grazing is important on the ground. And so I do think that there has been a shift, not just with our members, but with our organization nationally, to recognize that grazing plays an integral role in a lot of the ecosystems across the West.
Cool. That's good to hear that progress. Any loud voices of resistance still out there that you know of, or you think that that's being kind of quieted down?
Well, I guess you'd have to ask if that was internal or external. I think there's loud voices all over, and we're not trying to change the beef industry with our program. We're trying to help out our local ranchers to keep the land in their hands and the birds on the ground. And so I think that's a key piece. We don't want to change the way someone manages or, change the industry, but we want to tap into this niche and pat people on the back for doing good things.
Well, Audubon is not alone, or its members aren't alone, and amongst some groups that used to think, and then unfortunately I think there's still many that do, that livestock grazing is bad for the environment, bad for the land. And changing that thinking is a continual challenge. And the science is there, as you and I both know, to show otherwise, that good grazing management actually is helpful to healthy habitats. If we don't graze those lands, the bobcat, for example, can you imagine how bad those fires would be on all that habitat if it wasn't grazed and managed? I mean, you do have fires go through there, but the intensity of those burns, I would imagine, would be a lot greater if those grasslands weren't managed the way they've been managed. So turning that tide of education and having folks really understand that wildlife, birds, other critters live and coexist quite well with responsible grazing and land management.
I think the coolest part, Michael, is knowing where our food comes from. And, if people can get out on the ground and get out in the Golden Hills of California and then know that that's where their meat is coming from, that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so, it's been a part of our mission and goal is to show people what's happening on the ground and to show people that our food just doesn't come from these places. We're sequestering carbon. 90% of the water in the Central Valley goes through California's rangelands, and we're losing them, and we're losing them pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. So as part of the program for Audubon, you created a seal, a sticker, or however you like to describe it, that says this is Audubon certified, and that goes on a package of meat. What was the thinking behind that seal of approval?
So I'll start by saying that Audubon doesn't certify beef. We certify the land that these animals are raised on. Once someone has received their certification, they can then use our seal. And I think initially when Audubon developed this program back in the around 2015 in the tall grass prairies of Missouri, they wanted all of Audubon's constituents and people in a store to recognize who Audubon was and recognize that these people who are stewarding the land are doing good things by producing these animals. Now, fast forward several years, and a lot of folks aren't using it on their product. And that has to do with supply chains, bottlenecks in the supply chain, and how a beef brand actually has to source from a bunch of different places. And so what now we're seeing is that people want to partner with us and use our seal for promotion on their website or on their ranch gate when they have people come in. They also want to be able to share ideas with us and use the technical assistance that we provide to actually improve things on the ground on their place. And so different folks are in the program for different things and not just the use of that green seal that you can see on beef products.
So expand on that for me a little bit. That's an incentive for landowners, ranchers to get into the program, but what other incentives are there to a rancher that's thinking, okay, I have to develop a management plan. I'm going to possibly change some of the things I'm doing, maybe not, maybe I'm just codifying my management practices. But what is the incentive to go through that process, go through that audit, get certified? Why would a rancher want to do that?
When I go out and meet people on their ranch, I get the two most common questions I get are, how much does the program cost and what's in it for me? The program is free for our producers. So all of the time that Audubon puts in, all of the certification costs, and all of the restoration projects that we do with folks are all free. It's as far as I know, the only free beef certification on the market. Now, the second question is a little more complex. What's in it for me? I'd like to turn that around and say, well, what do you want? Like, what would you want out of a program like this? There could be a lot of things. Some folks want to have a formal monitoring plan so they can look at their soil health and make management recommendations to improve soil health. Vegetation transects, so going out and collecting info on the ground, not just for biodiversity, but for forage production, to think about how many AUMs they can have on a pasture in a given amount of time. And then lastly, the wildlife pieces. And so doing surveys for not just grassland birds, but other types of wildlife on their home ranches. So that's one component is monitoring, but also being able to tie folks in with our other partners. So we couldn't do this program without our partners throughout the state. And so being able to tie them into state and federal funding to get work done on their properties and get things done from the ranching standpoint is big as well.
So what year did the program start? I know you didn't, how many states did you say the program's in?
Well, we're currently operating in 18 different states now.
Right.
So it started in the tall grass prairies of Missouri, worked its way through the midgrass, the short grass, into the sagebrush steppe of the Rockies, down to the Chihuahuan grasslands of Texas, and then in 2019 came here to California.
Okay. So it really hasn't been around a long, long time, but during its lifespan, I imagine anytime you have a new program like this, there's some kinks. How have those kinks been worked out? Any challenges that you found over the course of time? A program doesn't start off the best it can be right off the bat.
Well, the first challenge that we ran into, Michael, is here in California, a rancher and ranching operation has to work a little bit differently than they do in the tall grass prairie of Missouri. So when the program started in Missouri, someone could have a full start to finish cow-calf and grass-finished operation on a single property. And so Audubon would go in and develop the habitat management plan for one piece of land. We came here and I recruited my first ranch and ranching operation, and they grazed on 6 different parcels in 3 different counties and 3 different ecoregions. And it's like, well, how do we write a single plan that can encompass an operation when they're on all these different properties? So we had to think initially a lot different about how the program would work here and how the land would be certified based on everywhere an operator grazes because of plant phenology and precipitation gradients. I guess another huge challenge is the biodiversity of California. And so a lot of these rangelands aren't historic grasslands. And so when we try to develop a plan for prescribed grazing for grassland bird habitat, but they're grazing in mixed chaparral and oak woodland, there aren't grassland birds there to start. And so thinking about how prescribed grazing can influence habitat and other ecosystems has been a big lift for us here in the state too.
Yeah, you've got obviously a huge difference in ecosystems between the Midwest and California, and even within California, the number of ecosystems is incredible. Even in one county, you can have many different areas that, from the coastal mountain range, you've got conifers and timber forest to oak woodlands, and it's a lot to that. So I can imagine that's going to be a big challenge to develop some sort of a plan that encompasses all of the areas and lands and types that a landowner or a rancher is going to utilize in California, both public lands and private lands.
It is. It is a challenge. And, my favorite part about this position is I get to see places all over the state. And I learn from everyone that I meet. And so being able to learn what works for people and what hasn't on the ground has helped me to communicate with other people and bring folks together.
How's the feedback been from landowners participating? Are they still gung-ho? Are they trying to figure out how to deal with some of the challenges that they have to deal with on just on an everyday basis?
Well, and I'll tie this back into the last question about what's in it for a rancher. Sometimes developing these plans takes time, and people don't have a lot of time to spare. And so that's when we come in and we help develop the plan, and then think about how we can utilize their time more efficiently. I think that the program is going through some growing pains because right now, the demand for the program exceeds our capacity. So we've had to put people on our wait list and have people wait to be a part of the program. And so we've recently, with some funding from the Wildlife Conservation Board of California, have expanded our capacity, hired a new rangeland ecologist, hired a marketing and outreach coordinator, and we now have a larger team to try to bring in new places, and I want to connect them. If someone needs a place to graze or they need grass or need somewhere to move their animals, is being able to connect these places from Orange County to Modoc and all the way over to Potter Valley where you're from.
what is the timeline? If a rancher contacted you and said, I'm interested, I heard you talk, I think this program is really cool, I want to participate in it. What is the typical timeline from that point, that initial conversation with you, to the point where they have reached certification?
Well, because of the high demand, we developed a questionnaire that we give out to folks. And based on their questionnaire, we prioritize how we can incorporate them with our capacity, but also now new recent partnerships with the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. So as opposed to having me in Yolo County write a plan for someone in Sutter or Slow County, we've partnered and trained resource conservation district personnel to be able to connect locally in their own geographies with their ranchers. And we now have funding from the state to actually subcontract resource conservation districts. So they're working local, they get to develop the plan with their local producer, and that can sort of streamline the process for enrollment and certification.
Is this timeline, this challenge of demand far exceeding your capacity, is that unique to California, or is that throughout the entire program?
It is. As far as I know, it's unique to California. In the Rockies, they're knocking on people's doors and trying to recruit folks in the Dakotas. And I don't know if there's a progressive gradient the further west you get in the country, but here in California, we did not expect to have so much interest.
Well, that's a good problem to have. Really good problem to have. Obviously, you've talked a lot about the benefit to the birds, a landowner rancher being in this program. Tell us a little bit more about what you see as the benefit to the consumer.
Well, I'm going to tell a story and I'll try to make it short. I'm from Laramie, Wyoming. There's not a lot of places to buy food there. I wouldn't consider it a food desert like Compchi or other places here in California, but there is one store in Laramie, that's the co-op, that you can buy organic food. And so when I first started the program, our national director told me, and has been telling people, you can feel good about your purchase. When you buy something, it'll make you feel good. Well, I thought that was pretty hokey. I was like, I'm not going to feel good buying something. I buy something to eat it, but it doesn't make me feel good. And so I was going through the Laramie Co-op, and I saw the bird-friendly seal on some beef in the freezer. And so I went and looked, and it was from the Reed Ranch. Well, in my former life, I had done sage grouse restoration work on the Reed Ranch outside of Douglas, and I knew they were doing good things for birds, and I knew they were doing good things for their community. And I went and I bought some of their beef. And sure enough, I had a smile on my face and I felt good about my purchase. And so maybe that's not the same for everyone. But I think that's what we're trying to do with the seal, is ensuring that people know where these animals were raised and the people who raised them are doing good things.
So what kind of impacts are you seeing from the program? It's been in existence now for a number of years. Are you seeing that attitude amongst other consumers, people going, both members of Audubon and others, just your average consumer thinking, hey, this is really cool. I like this. Are you seeing that? Do you have any metrics for this?
I think there's two different ways to look at it. One is, top down. If we can partner with a brand and get the seal seen in big grocery stores, then people will recognize and buy it. And the other approach is bottom up. And so working with folks who source animals direct to people and connecting people with their local chapters. Partnering with big brands is hard just because of the demand that they have to meet for the amount of supply. And so being able to connect folks locally with their chapters and educate people that way, and through word of mouth, has been sort of our drive for how we can get seal on product and in the market. We're also partnering with folks at restaurants, getting restaurants to serve it and be able to tell our story. And so those have been some of the successes. I think there's a lot of complications when you try to partner with many landowners for a collaborative. And so thinking about how we can do that better in the future is a priority of ours for sure.
Any other future changes you're trying to make to the program? Other priorities for future growth?
I think one of our number one future priorities, and has been a mission of Audubon's, is figuring out ways to connect equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging into a program that works with ranchers and works remote. And so being able to develop ways that we can connect with community members or disadvantaged people in communities is a priority of ours. And so, right now we've gone in and we've certified ranches and places that are already doing good things, right? They're doing good things for their riparian areas. They're really conscious of soil health, and they're doing good things out there. But maybe we should start working with the people who aren't doing good things. Our goal is to reverse the declining grassland bird populations, which if we're only incentivizing people who are doing good things, then we're only maintaining habitat there. And so trying to think outside the box when we prioritize the places that we work with and the places that we try to certify.
Earlier you mentioned the fact that we're losing these grasslands, we're losing these rangelands. And there's a nexus to we lose our bird habitats. How important do you feel it is to, either through programs like your conservation ranching program or the work that Rangeland Trust does, how critical is it that we keep the rate of decline of these rangelands and grasslands to a minimum?
Well, I like to use the western meadowlark as sort of my go-to for questions like this. Its Latin name is Sternella neglecta, and I think people have been neglecting western meadowlark habitat for quite some time, but it's probably the most common grassland bird species throughout the West. It's also in steep decline. Its populations have declined by 3% a year for almost the past 50 years, for a cumulative decline of 89%. So when you go out to a rangeland and you see one western meadowlark on a fence post, 50 years ago, there was 10 more western meadowlarks. Audubon science team went to their think tank and developed a tool and a model called Survival by Degrees. And it took a look at every bird species in North America, their habitat and distribution, and how their distribution would shift based on incremental increases in temperature and the threats associated with those. If you go into the model online, look at the western meadowlark. With this incremental increase in temperature, it'll be extirpated from California. And to me, that's scary. And why our program is really important is because it's not going to work if we do it on single places. We have to work in partnership with land trusts and with these large private land holdings that are providing the habitat for the birds and the other wildlife.
Yeah, and I've said this many times, that the work that we do in conserving these working lands, sometimes there's some criticism out there, surprisingly, folks that think that there should be more done, or we should be looking at greater ways to manage those lands. The landowner should be doing something more and more and more. But if we just keep it on the higher level and realize that if we lose those grounds, no management practice in the world is going to be effective on asphalt and concrete. Birds don't live there. Critters don't live there. We lose all those ecosystem services if it's paved over. So we're trying to be cognizant of the enemy of the good is trying to be perfect. And the work that we do and Audubon are doing collectively is, we think, and I hope that you can concur, and if you don't, let me know, is so important to maintaining these habitats. Grazing and livestock management on these lands, keeping them in production, keeping that brush land out there, that grassland out there, the trees out there, the riparian habitat, all of that is vital to avian species, other critters, all coexist with one another. And if we lose that, we lose so much more than just that open space that a lot of people see it as. Across
the West, and I keep saying across the West, people should know this, these landowners are only paid for one thing, and that's the animals they produce. And they are producing and stewarding a lot of other things for us, whether it's clean water or soil carbon or wildlife habitat or open space or recreation opportunities. Audubon's GIS team here in California developed a landscape prioritization where we took a look at 13 different factors, biotic, abiotic, socioeconomic, ranked one to another, put them in a hierarchy model, and then laid those rankings using their geospatial layers on a map of California. We have this map, and basically it shows the connection of these wildlife habitat corridors and protected lands and protected private lands. And thinking about things on a landscape level right now is really important based on the amount of areas that birds utilize and how they migrate.
The conservation ranching program through Audubon, as you said, you have a huge demand, which is a great problem to have. But if a landowner wants to know more, how can they find out more information?
Well, we've got a website. Our questionnaire is on the website. We also have an interactive map where people can go online and look at where to purchase raised on bird-friendly land certified products. And then we also have my contact and my director's contact on there. So you can shoot us an email directly. And then, there's some videos online and some other posts. So it should be pretty readily available if you look up Audubon Conservation Ranch in California.
Perfect. Well, Matt, thank you for taking time to be in our studio today. And it takes you off the ranch, which I'm sure we'd rather have been there to do this, but we weren't sure what the weather was going to be like today. So we're glad that you were able to break away, spend some time with us this morning, and share more information about the Conservation Ranching Program and the Audubon Society. We greatly appreciate what you're doing out there and look forward to more work together between the Rangeland Trust and Audubon and other landowners that are trying to do what they can for both their ranches and their habitats and that for the bird.
Michael, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure working with some of the folks that are in your network. And next time we can dub in some bird calls behind us or actually do it out in the field.
I vote for doing it out in the field.
Okay.
I'll take that any day.
Appreciate it.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about the Audubon Conservation Program, visit ca.audubon.org/conservation/ranching. As we celebrate National Ag Day, we hope that you will join us in tipping our hats to everyone that works hard to keep food on the table, clothes on our backs, and the land healthy and viable for the people and wildlife who rely on it. This closes the gate on another episode of Tune Into the Land. Be sure to subscribe so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. And if you like what you're listening to, leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.